The red light is back on, and I am back live for all of you. And to all of you in our chat today, to all of you listening to us after the fact, I want to first and foremost say thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode of Under Review. And joining me is a returning guest. He was on, I think, the fourth or third episode I ever had on the show. So, Josh, welcome back. Feel free to introduce yourself and plug whatever you got going on.
Thanks, Joe. Good to be here as always. Yeah, I think we were on the free agency preview show. We were on with Uber and we had a really good time outlining things. We mentioned things like Tremaine Edmonds might go to Chicago. That was a great call by Uber. I called out Damian Harris was my favorite idea in free agency. But no, I'm with the Bills Chat podcast. You might know me from Twitter on Bills Chat Pod. I do the Bills Chat podcast with my partner Luca. I do Built-in Buffalo Quick Hits on YouTube. So love for you to follow me on Twitter. Love for you to follow us on YouTube. We're trying to grow that as much as we can. And I'm excited to be here with you, Joe. And what do we want to talk about today? Is anything going on?
You know, it's been a pretty slow news week, and I can't really think of anything too topical. I wanted to make a list of the 5 players, and oh, wait. Oh, Josh, do you hear that? Oh, no. I swore I'd never talk about it again, but we have to talk about it again. The news cycle is upon us, ladies and gentlemen. It has been a whirlwind of 24-hour discussion in the Bills community and communities amongst the NFL alike. It has been the news that we cannot seem to avoid no matter how hard we try, but it's always fun to discuss it. And now, beyond it being a pipe dream trade that seemed to be too expensive at a point, it is now a realistic possibility, everybody. We are talking about DeAndre Hopkins. The question marks are back. And the rumors are fluttering like crazy. Now, if you have not seen this news at all, which I would be very surprised if you haven't, especially if you're following Cover One or Built in Buffalo, DeAndre Hopkins was released by the Arizona Cardinals, or Coyotes, according to some people, as of yesterday. And he was released pre-6-1. Now, that's important because what that means is Arizona is going to eat all $22 million that he is owed this year. They're fronting that money, getting it on their books, dealing with it in what's probably going to be a less than stellar year for the team. DeAndre Hopkins is now free to pick a team whenever he wants to do so, and that team can start negotiating literally as soon as he was released. So, Josh, I mean, we're talking about a crazy cycle that now seems realistic. Talk to me about what you're thinking on this. How realistic do you think it is? And really just what's your thoughts?
I think it's very realistic. I think the conversation changed yesterday when he was released. I always had my doubts that the Bills would be able to pull it off when it was a trade situation. And your guy, Greg Tomset, does a great job of outlining this. But when you're trading for that contract, it was such a hefty price at the initial deal. And you have to have room on your salary cap to make room for that deal. And I want to say he was around $20 million against the cap under contract with Arizona. You have to clear room for that to get him on your roster before you can restructure it. So any trade with Arizona really would have required them to partner with you, eat money before trading him. And that's why I always felt like it was a great idea, but kind of unlikely. But now that he's been released, Joe, the conversation has completely changed. You can get DeAndre Hopkins on your team. He can get the money he needs. But being able to draw up a fresh, brand new contract allows Brandon Beane, the Bills, and other teams the ability to structure that contract in a way that fits within the framework of your salary cap. I want to remind everybody, last offseason, the Bills signed Von Miller to a 6-year, $120 million deal. He only counted $5 million against the cap year one. There are void years you can do. There's things you can do to push money into the future when we think the salary cap will grow. So I think it's absolutely realistic.
Yes, I agree with that. So again, when we were talking about the trade news, a lot of us were very encouraged by some of the rumors that were swelling amongst the Bills. Apparently they checked medicals. Apparently we thought it was coming into fruition. And my honest feeling on the matter was that they were checking in. They were very interested. Brandon Beane is not going to shy away from talent. And let's get that clear right now for anyone thinking that, myself included, because I use this as a coping mechanism. For anyone thinking that there's no place for D-Hop, if Brandon Beane sees a fit for someone, he's going to find a way to make it happen. Again, I was one of those people in the draft this year that thought, Dalton Kincaid wasn't on their sites because where are we going to put him? I was wrong. They have him, and we see an exciting use for him in this offense. The same could be said about DeAndre Hopkins. And again, when the trade was speculated, we were all saying, all right, they're checking medicals. It seems like they're interested. Then, of course, the price came up. Like you said, Josh, it was going to be very hard to work around it. It was going to be a lot of money to front. And you also had to part ways with some capital. Now, I did not think Arizona was going to get to a point where they would just outright cut him. What I genuinely thought was that they were just going to bite the bullet and just get something. Late round draft picks, something. Better to walk away with something than nothing. But they have decided to just eat it, walk away, and call it a day and let D-Hop find a new team. Now, as Greg said yesterday, there are multiple restructures that can happen for the Bills to pull off and then be able to clear a little bit of cap room to maybe front load a deal for D-Hop this season. And like you said, like they did with Von Miller, add a few void years, similar to how Baltimore did it this year, where they had a semi-incentive based contract. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. I think if you could correct me, it was 13 million, something along that, but it could be upwards of about 18 to 19. So anyone feel free to fact check me in the comments there. But when we're talking about a deal for D-Hop, if you can restructure guys like Trey White or Deion Dawkins and be able to get yourself some of that cap space, now you're talking about giving D-Hop some money up front to play for this team. Add in a few void years as well. The contract might seem daunting when you see it, but now you'll be able to pay him, keep it a bit lighter on your cap, assuming he'll play for that money, and then have him for the year. And also, I mean, if you talk about Gabe Davis and his place potentially on this roster, if Gabe isn't here next season, but you have D-Hop on a one-year deal and you're not paying Gabe Davis the market value, which is probably going to be a high price, I'm suspecting that there's a potential to maybe retain D-Hop for even further than just a year. So Josh, what are your thoughts on that?
So it's a loaded conversation, and I think we have to be careful with a DeAndre Hopkins conversation of not turning it into what sounds like a Gabe Davis slander conversation, because that's neither the point that you or I want to represent.
Right.
I think DeAndre Hopkins is clearly an upgrade over Gabe Davis at this point in his career, and I do agree with you that right now the wide receiver market is tricky. You saw Jacoby Myers and Juju Smith-Schuster sign deals for like 11 million APY, and you're thinking, man, that's not as bad as we thought it might be. And if Gabe Davis can stay around for that, maybe you're interested in keeping him. But all signs point for me that Gabe Davis is probably going to have a bounce back year. He was dealing with the injury. He's in a spot on the Bills offense that is just built to produce. He's opposite a star wide receiver who draws coverage. Now you factor in Dalton Kincaid. You have a superstar quarterback, a pass heavy offense. He is going to get his numbers. I think he's going to hit free agency, and I think he's probably going to get paid, maybe by the Bills, maybe not. So I'm with you. And for DeAndre Hopkins, the landing spot makes a lot of sense. It's a spot you can drop him in. There's an immediate role, immediate path to production, and depending on how important it is, an immediate path to winning. So all signs point to him being interested. And if you listen to him on various podcasts, if you're to take him at his word, the Bills would appear to be at the very tippy top of his wish list.
Absolutely. And I mean, there were 3 requirements he had. It was good quarterback, good organization, and a good defense. The Bills, yes, they're still in that Super Bowl chase and have seemed to get to a sticking point in their progress. They haven't gotten there yet, but they check all of those boxes. And Josh Allen is the type of quarterback that D-Hop would love to play with. I thought it was really interesting that Hopkins himself said that he saw a little bit of Andrew Luck in Josh Allen. I never thought of that comparison, but what I like about that is D-Hop was on the front lines watching Andrew Luck in his division for a few years. To speak that highly of someone he probably respected as a quarterback and then apply that to Josh Allen makes me think that how he's speaking on Allen, his thoughts on the organization, his thoughts on the player are accurate. And I think that does bode well to him potentially wanting to come to the Bills. But there's been an interesting talking point, Josh, that I want to bring up to you as well. It's a matter of money and legacy. Now, you don't know how this player values either. We don't know DeAndre Hopkins. I haven't met him personally. Be awesome if I could hang out with him for a day. But you wonder, is it going to be a matter of money, or is it going to be a matter of just wanting to cement his legacy? A lot of guys want rings, but a lot of guys don't want to get a ring if it means they're not getting their bag too. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on the idea of money versus legacy with D-Hop specifically.
I think it's going to be money. And you know, I don't want to say that as any kind of insult to DeAndre Hopkins, but I think that's just a way that, well, okay. So one, when you're a player of DeAndre Hopkins' status and stature in the league and ability, in your mind, your confidence is so high that you think that any team you go to, you're going to elevate them above what they were before. So he could see in his brain going to a team like the Jacksonville Jaguars, just an example, and I go there, all of a sudden they're a Super Bowl team. So that could be how his brain works.
Right.
But, you know, I think, you know, you hear things, it certainly seems like it's a money-driven situation for him, but that doesn't have to mean that legacy is out the door. I think the Bills are in a great position to win a tiebreaker with almost any team in the league, as long as they're close money-wise. What I wouldn't expect the Bills to be able to do is to put the Deontay Hardy deal in front of DeAndre Hopkins and say, come play with Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs. We're going to put a ring on your finger. I think he would laugh them out the room. I think the Odell Beckham deal really complicated things a little bit, but also in a way set the framework for what the Bills can try to draw up for Hopkins. So as long as the Bills are willing to go close financially, which you have to believe they are, I think they'll probably win out most tiebreakers.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I think it's funny too, because Odell Beckham Jr. really had less leverage than DeAndre Hopkins has now, because OBJ hadn't played for a year, coming off the ACL tear. He's still a giant question mark, but the Ravens were just willing to pay him money and just see how it goes. D-Hop knows this. He's been in the league. He's played the game. There's a comment here from, I think it's Spin. So he said D-Hop's already earned over 100 mil. This is true. D-Hop's got his bag, but that's never going to stop someone from trying to chase to get more money. And in this case, D-Hop knows who he is. He knows his talent. He knows what he can bring to a team. He does want to play for a contender, but if the money's right, I'm sure a team who can make that offer for him would sway him if they were offering significantly more than what the Bills or the Chiefs or the Chargers or Ravens are potentially going to offer for him. But what I think is also interesting is you brought it up. They could be a dissalable tiebreaker against any team, even Kansas City. Now, Kansas City, to me, has the edge as far as what's the term I'm looking for? Like enticement to go there, right? They just won the Super Bowl. They have a Super Bowl winning quarterback, two-time Super Bowl winning quarterback, who's the best quarterback in the league. Let's be realistic. Even though I love Allen and I think Allen's right there at his feet, I think Mahomes has paved himself as the best in the league. I'm sorry to say that to anyone who might be offended by that. But when you're talking about the Chiefs and you have Andy Reid, this offensive mastermind, and you have Travis Kelce across from him, DeAndre Hopkins in that offense would have a defined role, right? Because you're looking at the receiver room for the Bills, you're looking at the receiver room for the Chiefs. It seems to me like that 1B to Travis Kelce's 1A is right for the taking, and he's competing with Valdez Scantling, Sky Moore, the rookie Rashee Rice, and I'm thinking of it, Jordy Fordson. So to me, like that's an enticing place to go. However, the point I'm trying to make here is the Bills are right there with them, even with the crowded receiver room, even with an offense that has plenty of weapons, plenty of targets to go around. D-Hop would establish himself as the immediate boundary across from Diggs. Davis would still get his shares too, but I think D-Hop's ability as a 50-50 guy with Allen, who's a deep ball passer, who now won't have to rely on that as heavily. A team that just by having him would change the way defenses game plan for Allen, game plan for the offense as a whole. I think there is a role for him. And again, you talk about Von Miller, you talk about last season where he was choosing between, I think it was Dallas, the Rams, and Buffalo. And he chose the Bills over the Rams, who he had just won a Super Bowl ring with. Now, granted, the Rams' decline had been steep this past year. Maybe he was more privy to that than we were. But to me, it seems like it doesn't matter if they won a ring or not. He still chose Buffalo because he saw the potential to get his third ring on a team that's never won one before. And that's something I think is interesting is when you talk about legacy, I think money talks louder, but I do think that plays a role in how these players approach signing in free agency, because now you're talking about going to a team that has never won a ring and being a part of history forever. Because let's be real, Josh, if D-Hop wins a ring in Buffalo, that team is getting statues outside the stadium. They're going to be enshrined forever. So I think it's an interesting talking point to say D-Hop could choose the Bills for a legacy move if the money is also fairly right. Because I think he would turn down a bigger offer if the team that was offering bigger money wasn't nearly as ready for contention. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I heard I can't give credit because I listened to so much content yesterday and I feel bad about this, but somebody said it perfectly. If DeAndre Hopkins wins a ring in Buffalo, he's a hero. If he wins another ring in Kansas City, he's just part of the Patrick Mahomes story. And that was so perfectly said. I really wish I could give it credit. Do you mind if we talk about the Chiefs real quick? Because I think there's a lot of fear out there with Bills fans in general that the Chiefs are the team that's kind of lurking to swoop in. And I want to be careful how I phrase this because I never pretend to be Adam Schefter, Ian Rappaport. That's not my gig.
You might get quoted.
I told you, Joe, I know just enough to be dangerous sometimes, and it's not always accurate. But right. I am friends with a couple of folks that are close to the Chiefs on the coverage side. Okay, so they have a good feel for how that team works. I feel very comfortable that the Chiefs have made an offer on DeAndre Hopkins, and let me sidestep that conversation for 1 second. That means very little at this point of the negotiation table. I think a lot of teams have made an offer. Think of yourself in a fantasy football league. Joe DeRosa says Saquon Barkley is on the block, and 7 people from the league message him, hey, will you take Devin Singletary for Saquon Barkley? Joe would laugh you out of that DM, but technically you have made an offer. So when you hear the reports of teams have made an offer, that doesn't mean that anything is imminent. I'm comfortable that the Chiefs have checked in. I'm very comfortable that the Chiefs have checked in. What I can tell you about my read on how the Chiefs operate right now, they are very comfortable with who they are. And they're comfortable. I mean, they won a Super Bowl last year after trading away Tyreek Hill.
Mhm.
They have, just like we mentioned with the Bills, what they can do with Tredavius White. The Chiefs actually have the most money available to them of any team in the league where they can restructure contracts. A very simple extension of Chris Jones can free up, I believe, $16 million for them, which is absolutely enough room to put DeAndre Hopkins under the cap for
100%.
them. But I'm not convinced that that is how the Chiefs view themselves. I think they do have a long-term lens here. I think they are the kind of team that thinks playing for them is an honor and should grant a discount to them for players. And quite honestly, they have earned that. Much like the Patriots with Belichick, where it was like, will you give us a discount to come win a ring with us? I don't think that the Chiefs are the kind of team that are going to win a bidding war. They are going to expect their offer to be hopefully close enough that the ability to play with Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce will be enough to push them over the edge. But that's why I have my doubts that DeAndre Hopkins will wind up with the Chiefs, because everything I've heard is their offers have not been close financially. Now, this was prior to yesterday. This was during the trading period of DeAndre Hopkins, of what a new deal would look like. But they have not been in the ballpark of what he's expecting to get paid. And that makes sense. It would be kind of odd for them to trade away Tyreek Hill last offseason because he's too expensive, and then the next year turn around and give DeAndre Hopkins $20 million. They're very comfortable with who they are. They're very comfortable with their ability to identify playmakers in the draft cheaply, second wave free agency, and still be a top-notch offense. So sitting here right now, I could absolutely be wrong. Unless he just wants to go to the Chiefs, I would be kind of surprised if he winds up as a Chief.
Well, the thing too is the Chiefs just won a Super Bowl, like you said, and their best receiver outside of Kelce was who? Juju?
Yeah.
Sky Moore? Like, the thing with them is they can take guys that maybe aren't your true wide receiver one archetype, your true elite guy, and make it work, because Andy Reid is that good of an offensive mastermind, and Patrick Mahomes is the best quarterback in the league. I apologize to any Bills fan that is probably sick of hearing about the Chiefs. I know that's not what you came here for. We're just using this as a reference point to talking about D-Hop for the Bills, because that seems to be the immediate contending team. However, I do agree with you to some extent. The Chiefs aren't going to overspend for DeAndre Hopkins. They don't need to. What do they have to prove? They've proved it already. So for them to chase a 31-year-old receiver and go through these hoops to try and, they want to extend Chris Jones anyway, but to do it for the sake of getting a free agent who's obviously only got a few years left in the tank, yes, he'd be great for their offense, but their offense is already going to be good beyond D-Hop. It's not that they need him. I think it's more the idea that they could use him and find a way to just make it more indefensible. But again, they also have a very good running game, a very good offensive line, and receivers that seem to get open all the time because Andy Reid can find a way to use them successfully. So to me, with that argument in mind, I could definitely understand the Chiefs being less likely than people think. However, I think any contending team is going to check in and put their tabs on a receiver who becomes available, especially an all-pro one like DeAndre Hopkins. How could you not? You have to at least inquire. Even teams that are long shots that might not have, the immediate pieces to be a Super Bowl contending team are probably still doing their due diligence. I feel like you'd be doing your organization, your team, and fans a disservice by not doing so. But to me, I think the likelihood as far as Buffalo's play for it is high. I don't know anything concrete, so I don't want to act like I have sources when I don't. But just based on how interested they were in the trade line, according to what we heard, and based on the sense it makes, because let's be real, it's a crowded receiver room, but you'll find a way to use him. So Josh, I want to ask you, when it comes to his actual role and how he would be used in this offense, should DeAndre Hopkins be signed, how do you see them using him on a game-to-game basis, assuming he's healthy?
So he's still an excellent player. And I think he's instantly the second best wide receiver on this team. And I think if he's fully healthy, you could probably at least have a conversation of, is he as good as Diggs? Like that's how highly I think of this player. And just to add some context to that, I know if you look at his stat sheet year over year, you might look at his stats last year and see, 717 yards, 64 receptions. What happened? Well, he had a 6-game suspension to start the year, and then he missed the last 2 games because of a low-grade injury. I think a lot of the direction that the Cardinals season was going played into him not playing.
And he had 100 yards less than Gabe Davis.
Right.
in that amount of time. That's unbelievable.
It's
That really
unbelievable.
is.
Those stats in 9 games, not catching passes the entire time from Kyler Murray. It was Colt McCoy, Trace McSorley, David Blau. If you extrapolate those stats over 17 games, 120 receptions, 1,300 yards. So I feel like the gif of, are you not entertained? Like that would be. So to answer your question, Joe, I think you push whoever aside needs to be pushed aside to make sure that Diggs and Hopkins are on the field at the same time. But this gives you a luxury. Like I don't know, Joe, I don't know if you're an NBA guy, but a big topic in the NBA is load management.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when you look at the fact that your 2 top receivers would both be 30 and older this year, the ability to not have to have Stephon Diggs or DeAndre Hopkins play 90% of the snaps any given Sunday is a fantastic luxury now that this season has been stretched to 17 games. The Bills are one of only 2 teams in the entire NFL that have played at least 2 playoff games the last 3 seasons. Those add up over time, wear and tear on your body. So I think having DeAndre Hopkins in your building, if Stephon Diggs dings his knee and he's questionable, the team would have more confidence saying, take this week off. We're good. It opens up so much. But the larger point, you get him on the field. You probably shove Gabe Davis aside. He goes back into that wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 role, and he would be fighting with snaps, unfortunately, with Dalton Kincaid, who it seems like they have really big plans for.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's interesting you bring that up, because how I viewed a D-Hop in this offense was more that you would actually transition Diggs to be more of a slot guy than you would have Davis move around. And the reason I say that is because Davis's primary role is a boundary guy. Diggs can line up in the slot and be successful. We saw it last season. Dalton Kincaid is your rookie guy that you want to get acclimated to this offense. I think including DeAndre Hopkins would put less pressure on Kincaid more than anybody else, because now he can slowly acclimate to the playbook, get more used to it, get involved in that slot role, be used a little bit more sparingly, which I know people would probably be upset about that, getting him in the first round at the pick they took him in, especially trading up. But to me, you're giving him the opportunity to kind of crawl before he walks, before he runs in this offense, which could benefit his development greatly. And then you're not getting a drop off in slot play at the same time, because if you have your boundary guy being DeAndre Hopkins and you have these occasional looks where D-Hop goes in the slot with Davis across from, or I'm sorry, where Diggs goes in the slot and D-Hop is across from Davis, it to me is still just as viable of an offense, and then just puts less pressure on your rookie to develop. Or if you wanted to line D-Hop up, because I think Kevin in our space yesterday said he lined up 30% of the time in the slot. So feel free to fact check me on that.
It was 25. Only reason I know is I did this for a video on Built in Buffalo. 25 in the slot, 20 over the course of his career. Right. So he's absolutely used to doing that. Yeah.
So you could line him up there occasionally too. You can mix and match your slot guys if you want to get creative with it. Now, do I think that would happen more often than not? I'm not sure. I think Kincaid was drafted for a reason. I think even with D-Hop, you're probably going to, like you said, have Gabe Davis slightly relegate his role. And I am a Gabe Davis defender. I think he's poised to have a big year if you don't get DeAndre Hopkins. I've defended him time and time again. His play, how good he actually is, the fact that his catch percentage is low because he's a vertical guy and those passes have a lower probability of being completed in general. There are times where it was his fault and times where he got a lot of flack from a fan base that really wanted to see more out of him, because the expectations after that Chiefs game were huge, understandably so. You don't accidentally get 200 yards. But I think Gabe Davis would take a slight relegation if you had D-Hop come into this offense, but I don't think that's a knock on him. Nate Geary said this yesterday on Greg's special episode. It's a move in a vacuum. It's not a move that you're using to indicate Gabe Davis's status or where he's going to go. He said it's more of just like, this is DeAndre Hopkins. This is an all-pro guy. Let's go get him. And to me, that makes perfect sense. Why are you going to pass up on talent? So I want to ask this question just because, I've heard this name come up before. I know fans really love this name. I was a fan of him, and I've defended him too at the end of the year. But Khalil Shakir seems to be the odd man out. And I want to know your opinion on Khalil Shakir should they get DeAndre Hopkins.
Becomes a loaded room. And Sherfield is almost positively going to have a role on special teams. And you already hear Josh Allen talking about him in OTAs. The money they gave Hardy, you can just go ahead and give him a jersey on game day. That's a pretty heavy deal for him, at least just for 1 year. I'm with you. And then, Justin Shorter, the rookie they drafted, comes in with a resume as a guy that can be an immediate impact on special teams. So Brandon Beane even said as such that he's going to get a jersey on game day. I think right now, if you put DeAndre Hopkins in this mix, Khalil Shakir easily is the guy that's kind of the odd man out. And that's going to sting a lot of people to hear. And I could be wrong, but I don't know how much he offers on special teams. And I know we were all excited when the Bills got him in the 5th round because we had all seen mocks where he should go in the 2nd or 3rd round. And Brandon Beane even said we would have picked him in the 4th round if we had that pick. But the reality is he is a 5th round wide receiver. And last season, when the Bills needed more impact out of wide receivers, they opted to go to the street versus their own roster to get that impact. So we can use the context clues that the Bills have given us about Khalil Shakir, or we can stick to our original thoughts on what he could have been when he came into the league. I still think there's a chance he can grow into a very useful player on this roster. Mm-hmm. But sitting here on May 27th, envisioning what it will look like if they add DeAndre Hopkins to the top of this room, I think he's probably the odd man out.
Yeah, and it stinks because I like Shakir. I think Shakir had a slow development curve, and I think that's affecting a lot of these decisions too. You saw kind of times where he missed his blocks. I can't recall games at the top of my head. Times where he missed his blocks, times where he ran the wrong route, like things that affected Josh's trust in him. And, a lot of times when we watch games and we don't watch beyond the game, and I'm guilty of doing this in the past too, you'll not hear a receiver's name, you'll not see them and wonder why aren't we using them more? But also look at it as, is this receiver doing enough to be used? Like, are they getting themselves open? Are they executing the way they should? Can McDermott, Dorsey, Allen trust this receiver to go out there and make plays? And if the answer is no, because they're still developing, then there you go. Now, this is a team that I think with Allen is always going to have its window open. However, how wide that window is open varies on your roster. And right now, their roster, when healthy, is incredibly loaded. So to wait on Shakir's development versus the idea that we have an all-pro wide receiver available to us that we can go get now for a reasonable amount of money, assuming they can clear the cap space, I see that as, again, one of those moves that I wouldn't really call because we don't believe in Shakir, but because we can upgrade, and that would unfortunately have an effect to the cause where Shakir might not be the guy that they thought he could be or will develop into that at least immediately. Maybe he becomes a trade chip. Maybe they decide to hold on to him, and maybe they have D-Hop for a year, and then Shakir assumes that role as that kind of where do you need me receiver because he can play on the outside or in the slot. It's to be seen, but I definitely think his role is going to decrease should you add DeAndre Hopkins. So, yeah, I guess, Josh, the last thing I'll ask you on this is just what are your final thoughts on DeAndre Hopkins' likelihood, anything you want to contribute as far as just this discourse as a whole?
I think it's very likely that the Bills are in the front of the line for his services. My one hesitation is there's 32 teams in this league. There's desperate owners. And anytime you get into a bidding war, all it takes is one person to go way above and beyond what anybody else is willing to do. And it kind of cancels out the whole situation. I get the sense maybe Jacksonville might be a little bit more aggressive in this than maybe we even thought, because they have what seems like a pretty loaded wide receiver room. But, if you think about where they're at on their trajectory, Trevor Lawrence still has 2 years left of being cheap. And maybe they're looking at it as a situation where we can cram a bunch of money in these next 2 years where we have a lot of cap flexibility. So that's a team to watch. There's always the Florida State tax there. But I really do think this is something Bills fans should be excited about. Bills fans should be engaged in. I understand the I don't want to get hurt again thing, but there were a lot of reasons to believe, even leading up to the draft, that the Bills were interested. I had heard that there were players on the Bills team. This is back around the time that the Buffalo Soldier video came out on Instagram, that there were players on the Bills team that thought that DeAndre Hopkins was about to be a Buffalo Bill. And, whether or not they were just watching that Instagram video and put two and two together, or they had heard from people close to the situation. But there's been enough context clues throughout that let us know that the Bills were in on this, whether it's Pac-Man Jones on Pat McAfee, who's like this with DeAndre Hopkins being like, pay attention to the Bills, or DeAndre Hopkins smirking every time the Bills come up. They're in this. And I think as long as it's an even race, the Bills, I think, will come away with DeAndre Hopkins. If a team comes out of left field and wants to give him $25 million APY, then you tip your cap, you wish them the best of luck, and you settle in at the fact that you're probably still going to have a top 5 offense without him.
100%. And Uber made a great tweet yesterday. If the Bills don't get D-Hop, the season is not over. I'm paraphrasing. If the Bills don't get D-Hop, the season is not over. If the Bills do, they are not a Super Bowl guarantee. Again, Spaces was saying, if we have DeAndre Hopkins, this is going to mean that we have to, we're never going to have a 3 and out, or we should never have a 3 and out. We should never fail on a touchdown drive. Let's be realistic. Even with DeAndre Hopkins, shit happens. Like, it just does. A pass is going to be errant. Josh Allen isn't always accurate. Someone's going to drop a ball. Something is going to happen where someone fumbles, someone gets picked, whatever it is. It doesn't mean that you're a guarantee. But what it could potentially mean is your offense now creates nightmares for defensive coordinators. What are you going to do? How are you going to defend them? Do you want to run quarters? Do you want to leave someone open underneath? Do you want to have too high? Do you want to load the box? Because another thing that we haven't talked about much is that this team seems to be trending into more like a power running style team, especially with the addition of Torrance. That right side is going to be really hard to defend because even though Spencer Brown needs to take that step forward as a pass blocker, his run blocking ability is very good. He's a freak athlete. So there's going to be a way for the Bills to beat any defense this year. And if you add in DeAndre Hopkins, that just becomes exponentially more difficult to defend. So for me, as far as likelihood, I don't know anything on the internal side, so I'm just going to go off pure vibes. I'm going to call it a pretty likely. Let's call it pretty likely. Let's not get them too enthused because I don't want to. I'm one of those people that tries to talk myself out of things to not get too excited. However, there is a lot of reason to believe this could happen. Again, I talked about Von Miller earlier. I talked about how he left the Super Bowl winning team that he got the ring with to come here to reestablish his legacy, to try and get the third ring, to help a D-line that needed help, that got rebuilt. DeAndre Hopkins could do that same thing. He's also very close with Von Miller. And 2 weeks ago on the Pat McAfee show, Von said specifically, Diop has talked about all these things he wants to go to. And to me, it sounds like the Buffalo Bills. Now, Von Miller has said a lot of things. They have not come true. He has said he would like to play week 1 no later than week 6. We will see. He tore his ACL fairly late in the year. He was like, OBJ is interested. Maybe OBJ was, but it didn't happen. And he was trying to recruit him. So let's take that with a grain of salt. However, I do think having Von on your team, having him be close with DeAndre Hopkins, potentially having a pitch where some people like, your GM, your coach, Vaughn, Josh, and Diggs walk in the room and try to convince him, and it's a really good pitch and he gets really enthused. That could be enough of a sway for him to come in. And one last thing I want to bring up that is in the comments. And also, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. I know there's 100 plus of you now. Really appreciate it. Please, if you haven't already, please leave a like on this video. It helps grow our channel. It helps get all of our content out to all of you Bills fans that like watching us. I appreciate you all very, very much. Also, again, if you didn't see the first comment on this video, this morning was hell. I'll tell that story later. But I want to find the comment that someone left here because it was about a tweet that we had here on Cover 1. This is it right here. Cover 1 is reporting that the Bills are currently looking to free up money through a Trey White restructure. If his knee looks okay on imaging, Trey plus Dion restructures give us enough to match OBJ deal. So, Josh, yes, Greg initially tweeted about the restructures that I had referenced earlier for Trey White, Deion Dawkins. I've got to find the tweet to find how much cap room that would clear up. But there was a report yesterday from Eric, shout out to Eric, that we are, imaging was apparently done and we're seeing, how Trey's knee looks before they could potentially restructure him. So what are your thoughts on that news?
Well, it's significant. And, I trust Eric, obviously, with his report. But obviously, it's significant, but it doesn't have to mean that anything's imminent, right? Like Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott, they are going to be methodical about everything they do. So if they are talking to DeAndre Hopkins and they think that they have the opportunity to get within his dollar range, they want to make sure that they have all their ducks in a row for what has to happen to get him under. So they probably are just making sure, is Trey White good? And that would kind of surprise me because of the list of names that you can restructure and kind of push down the road. I think Trey White may have been the 4th on that list for me, but I don't have access to his medical records. I did not watch OTAs. I heard the positive reports about that, but that's not nothing. And it makes sense that he is one of those 4 players we talk about that the Bills are going to have to not extend, but by pushing the money down, it makes it harder to get rid of him quickly. So you'd be looking at really 2 more years at least of Tredavius White. And I think that's encouraging for a lot of us. Well, for one, a lot of us that want DeAndre Hopkins because it says that the Bills are at least looking into it. And 2, a lot of us that have had concerns, I'll put myself on that list about, oh man, are we ever going to see the Tredavius White we saw 2 years ago? An ACL injury is no joke. He looked a little hesitant early on. You saw some flashes down the stretch. So there's a lot of reasons to like that report, and kudos to Eric and the Cover 1 team for putting that out there.
Yeah, Eric, whoever the source was, because obviously I'm not an inside the well guy, but yeah, he reported that yesterday. That tweet came out, and I thought it was interesting because, like you said, the D-Hop news, obviously that could bode well for potentially getting him. Also, if they it shows you that if Trey's healthy, he apparently shined at OTAs. They want to potentially have him stay down the road. And he was an all-pro not too long ago. And Aaron Quinn's made this point before, and a lot of people would agree that when it comes to ACL tears, especially for a position like cornerback, that takes time to recover from. That's going to take you time to get back from. Trey White came back mid-year, his first game back. It's not just the physical hurdle of the injury, it's the mental hurdle. With all the cutting you have to do on your knee, with all the pivoting and sudden motion and stopping that you have to do on an injury that, it's one of those things where it just kind of goes like that. That is hard to overcome. And I think that first part of it really affected Trey, but also just getting reacclimated to the speed of the game when you've taken so long to rehab that. It's very hard to come back from that and be your old self right away. Now that Trey has had all this time to get himself right, to do those isometrics that can help him get his knee fixed up, to hopefully be at a balance where he's not overcompensating on the other knee, which, if that was really as bad as it could have been, I'm sure that would have happened already. For him to be looking good in OTAs, that makes me more excited for Tredavius White this year, especially when you have the up-and-comer Kaiir Elam on the other side of him, who seemed to start developing into a true starting role later on in the year and had a very good playoff game against Miami. So if this does pan out for Trey, it's a win-win because now you're getting to take money off the books this year to potentially go get Diop if that is their intention. Again, I don't want to say anything is set in stone. I don't want to speak like I know anything. I don't know what the Bills' actual plan is, but it's also nice to just see that Trey White might be in their sights of, okay, he's looking good. We're confident to retain him for a bit. So yeah, that's really the D-Hop discussion I got planned. You got any more thoughts, Josh, before we move on?
Just quickly on Trey White. And what's interesting is I think there's this thought like, oh, he's going to be 30 soon. Like, is he going to age out at corner? And one thing I've learned is Sean McDermott, and up until this point, Leslie Frazier have had such a good eye for secondary help. And if you think about Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde, they started their careers at cornerback before transitioning to safety. So I think, not this year, probably not next year, but there is a path that if Tredavius White starts to slow down at cornerback, that doesn't have to mean it's the end. You could see a situation where Sean McDermott says, okay, can you give me a couple of years at free safety? I'm not predicting that, but they've had such a good eye for maximizing their secondary players. And we know that they love players that started off at cornerback. So I think even if you do push some money down the road on Tredavius White and you commit to him for the next couple of seasons and he does slow down, I still think there's a path to him helping you, even if it's not as you originally thought.
Well, you look at, some of the most prominent corners in the league and how their career trajectory kind of goes, right? Like, especially physical corners. Like, you'll have your high level play for a few years, but that life cycle is very short. It gets harder to just keep up with the young guns in the league when you get to your 30s. I mean, I think of the Vontae Davis quote, and I'll do it in the Trey White voice, but it's a young man's game. That is literally, it's true. I mean, especially for receivers and corners. Oh God, that was a terrible impression. But
I'm glad it was on video, Joe.
Yes, you can roast me
forever.
With that. Yeah. It's going to live forever, whatever. It was a really funny Instagram live. If you've never seen that, that is one of the funniest videos ever. McCoy and Trey White just going back and forth on that. But yeah, it was like, it's true. The young guns are always going to have the advantage. You're going to lose that physical edge as you get older as a corner. So you're going to probably transition to being more of an off-the-ball guy where you play zone, try to sit in your spot and hopefully make plays. I mean, you look at like Pat Pete right now or Richard Sherman for the last few years of his career. There's a path where Trey White could still be viable on this team. And I think Sarah pointed it out in the chat. You are going to have to pay that bill eventually, but think of the risk versus reward. Are you expecting Trey White to have a super sudden decline? Well, if his knee looks good and you think he could still give you about 2 more years of solid play, then I don't think so. I think it's worth it. And then if that's opening up money for you this year to potentially open the window even wider to get a very good receiver and get that money off the books, then I see it as worth it. Hopefully it pans out. Again, every action has consequence. It doesn't always work. Bob Miller went down with an ACL and we signed him to a lot of money. Sometimes the cards just don't fall your way, and that's a risk they know they're going to take. But hopefully it pans out for the team and we can be successful going forward. Josh, it is time to move on to what was originally going to be the core topic of this show. So now for all of you, this was just going to be a show about our top 5 most important offensive players, not named Josh Allen, I want to add, because that's too easy. Of course, he's number 1. So you can't put him on the list. We'd be talking about him for 45 minutes. But what we wanted to do was make a list of just our 5 most important players on this offense and just kind of our justification for why. Naturally, the DeAndre Hopkins news derailed that whole discussion. So we're going to still do it. We're just not going to give it as much time as we thought we were. So Josh, I'm going to ask you, give me your number 5 top most important player on the Bills offense.
I love making lists. I was so excited about this game. DeAndre Hopkins kind of pushed it back a little bit, but I'm so glad we stuck to doing this. So my number 5, and I want to tell you right off the bat. So the way I made this list is you're going to see this throughout, is importance to me is what does it look like if they're not there? So that's kind of how I'm judging this. So my number 5 is going to be Bills center Mitch Morse. And I will tell you, Joe, as we go through this list, the top 3 for me were pretty easy. After that, there's a group of about 5 players that I had to debate. But when you look at what I project this offensive line to look at, which is Connor McGovern and then Osiris Torrance on either side of him, you have a rookie and then a first-year Bill. I think that continuity at center is going to be very important this season. I think Mitch Morse has kind of become like the new Matt Milano, where people just assume that he's injury prone. He's only missed 5 games in 4 years with the Buffalo Bills. The Bills were 3-2 in those games. That's such a small sample size. You really can't get too much out of that. But I look at Mitch Morse, I look at the continuity factor, and I look at the fact that I do think that having Mitch Morse and Deion Dawkins as the stalwarts on that offensive line, I have confidence in Ryan Bates if he has to go in that situation. But this offseason was about protecting Josh Allen. We all saw how it ended in Cincinnati, where it just felt like there were free rushers after free rushers coming in. The quarterback of that offensive line is what wins out that 5th spot for Mitch Morse for me.
So Mitch Morse, I agree with, but he's not my 5. He's further up in the list, actually. Spoilers. My number 5 is James Cook, and I'm going to tell you why. So for me personally, I think one of the advantages to the Bills offense this year could be if they have their running attack be more present. Now, I want to stress, I don't think they were an ineffective rushing team last year. They weren't. And James Cook had some pretty good numbers for a rookie. They didn't call upon it enough. But I want to see James Cook continue on that path and develop into that true running back 1. And why I want that is, 1, you're getting the benefit of offsetting some of the plate of Josh Allen, right? Obviously, taking the ball out of Josh Allen's hands is something you don't usually want to do. However, if the path of doing so leads to an effective result, then I think it's worthwhile to start giving Cook some more snaps, to start letting him be that true running back 1, to start allowing him to get a few more carries over the span of a season that can make a significant enough difference to have Josh avoid putting his body at risk. You can make the argument that Josh running is something that is going to eventually cause some harm for him later on in his career. I don't want to see that happen sooner than later. I want him to have a prolonged career in the NFL. To have James Cook take that step forward, to continue being a feature back in an offense that could use more rushing power, especially in tandem with the new offensive pieces they got on the line, I think that could benefit this offense greatly. I think you're taking the ball out of Josh's hands, yes, but you're doing it in an effective way where the offense will still be productive. And then you're just talking about another threat offensively. Say they get Hopkins, say they don't, but they still have a very viable passing attack. Now with a good running game, you just open a bunch of things up. Do you need to have an elite running back to have good play action? No, but it certainly helps. So why not give yourself that opportunity to just create as many wrinkles as possible for a defense? It makes the life of Josh easier, and it makes the life for Dorsey easier because he can manipulate this any way he wants to. He has all these different choices to do, and adding in the threat of James Cook just being able to burn you would be something that I think is super important to this offense and make it even better than it already was. So that's my 5. Josh, let's hear your number 4.
So James Cook did not make my list. He was one of those hard cuts. I agree with everything you said, and I'm not really going to add on too much to what you said, although I will say he was excellent last year as a runner, and we didn't see so much out of him as a pass receiver, and that's really what got me to him in the draft process, is what we saw out of him as a pass receiver at Georgia. So I'm excited to see what Ken Dorsey can unlock there, because the Bills for the last couple of years have had a hard time running teams out of these too high shells they play against, where they're just respecting the pass, daring teams to run, because even Devin Singletary at his best, if you're going to have a 6-man box, he's not going to break off a 50-yard run. It's going to be a 10-yard run. You live with it. James Cook has a chance to turn any play into a game breaker, and I'm with you. I think the sky is the limit for him, particularly if they unlock some of his ability in the passing game. My number 4 might be a little bit of a surprise. It's going to be Dawson Knox. And I think since the pick of Dalton Kincaid, there's been this idea that Dawson Knox is somehow less valuable to this offense. And you can even see it, fantasy is just one metric. You don't have to take it super serious, but you see where Dawson Knox is now going in fantasy drafts very, very late. And then Dalton Kincaid's going very high. But I think people need to keep in mind, for this 2 tight end offense to work, you need that second tight end. And Dawson Knox is not Lee Smith. I think the fact that we're talking about him as an inline tight end in this 2 tight end set is accurate. He did have his best year as a run blocker last year, according to PFF, but he only lined up in line 48% of the time last year. He was in the slot or at wide receiver 45% of the time. The other times he was in the backfield or what have you. But he is still a explosive player. He was 5th in the NFL for touchdowns among tight ends. He was 14th in yards, 10th in yards per catch among tight ends who had at least 35 receptions last year. I think Dawson Knox is a very important piece to this offense. One, because it will help unlock the 11.5 personnel that Brandon Beane talked about.
Yeah.
And when you have Dalton Kincaid in the slot, you're going to have some very big blocking mismatches with Dalton Kincaid on a DB. If they go that way, it's going to put the defense in a bind. And it also is going to put them in a bind when it comes to coverage because you're going to have a linebacker on Knox. Knox needs to be healthy. I think he's still going to be a big part of this offense. Is he going to have more stats than Dalton Kincaid this year? I'd probably bet against it, quite honestly. Now, talk to me if they get D-Hop, maybe things change. But the other thing I will tell you, Dawson Knox staying healthy is vitally important to the trajectory of Dalton Kincaid, because for Dalton Kincaid to have immediate impact, I firmly believe they need to simplify his role and say, you are a slot receiver. Will you line up in line every once in a while? I'm sure. We saw Gabe Davis line up in line. Will there be plays where you're blocking in line? I'm sure. That is not what he's going to major in year one. And for that to work, you need Dawson Knox healthy, doing the dirty work, doing the, okay, this linebacker's coming. Am I blocking or am I the hot route on this pass play? That's the stuff that you don't want to overwhelm Kincaid with year one. You want to have him have a clear mind, simplify the offense, and allow him to go out there and be a weapon. I think Dawson Knox has a chance to be a real unsung hero of this offense this year. And I'm kind of excited to see where it goes.
That's an excellent point, and I agree with everything you said. I really can't contribute much more to that because the best part of that, in my opinion, was mentioning the 12 personnel. That's only going to work the way we want it to if both tight ends are there and able to contribute. Like, if you don't have Dawson Knox healthy or he's not playing up to his ability, then yeah, what good is the 12? Because who's the other tight end you're going to run in that? Quentin Morris? We did that last season, and it wasn't as effective. And that's not a knock. It's not a true knock on Morris, but when you're talking about the upside of Knox and Kincaid, I think Morris has a place in this offense, but I think it's really going to be as a blocker and occasional red zone threat. I think that's indicated by the fact that you went out and got Kincaid to kind of man that hybrid tight end receiver role. Dawson Knox, I think, got going towards the end of last year, and I think you saw what he could bring to the offense, especially in the red zone, which I think is his best part of the field. I want to see him used more in the red zone. I know he's a good blocker. Maybe you'll see him block a lot this year, especially with the additions of good goal line backs like Damian Harris, Latavius Murray. If you want to run Cook, if you want to use Allen in that role, that could be effective. But I also think he's effective in the red zone, and I'd like to see him used there more. So he's an honorable mention for me. My number 4 is actually the other half of 12 personnel, Dalton Kincaid. And yes, he's a rookie, but his role, at least what we're expecting him to be, is beyond that of your traditional tight end, because he's also manning the slot role, which we've had major issues with this past season. We were running a slot by committee that just didn't perform up to speed. We gave McKenzie his fair shot. He earned that role in training camp. He deserved to get that start. It just didn't pan out as well as we hoped it would. And then Crowder went down with his injury, and Shakir was building the rapport, and it took him a while to develop. Dalton Kincaid is coming in to essentially be the answer to that. We took him because of his smooth movement in the middle of the field. We took him because he could be that size mismatch that you referred to earlier, Josh. And to me, I think having that slot is a vital cog in the machine of the Bills offense. They miss what Cole Beasley brought to the table. They missed his ability to create space with his feet, to get open in the middle of the field, to give Josh those underneath layups that he desperately needed to keep the offense moving. They missed the guy that could turn 1st and 10 into 2nd and 4, turn 3rd and 2 into a first down. Instead, they were running so many plays behind the chains last year at 3rd and 10, 3rd and 8, whatever you want to call it. They need the option that has the easy button attached to him, a layup for Josh, someone that you can scheme into your offense to just get open short to keep the ball moving. Maybe he'll be great in the red zone, but to me, Kincaid's value is as that slot guy to not be a new Beasley, but to be an effective Dalton Kincaid in this offense that can get open as a big body in the middle of the field. I think it's so astronomically important to how well this offense can function. I think the lack of an effective slot last year is why you saw this over-reliance on deep shots and this kind of regression in Josh's decision-making, because I don't think Josh trusted who he had in the middle of the field. Even when guys were getting open, I don't think he was looking that way because he didn't trust what he was seeing throughout the course of the season. If you give Josh Dalton Kincaid and Dalton Kincaid succeeds in the middle of the field, that opens everything up for this offense. And I stress everything. It is going to bring people up to defend him. It is going to give more one-on-one looks up top. It is going to create more looks that favor Josh's play style. It is going to be so effective. Even just his presence, if he's good enough to just get open, will value this offense so much more than it was last year, which was already a top unit in the NFL. He's my number 4. I think he has a huge role to fill out this year. Again, if you bring in a Hopkins, maybe you take something off his plate a little bit, and that's good. But I still want to see this kid take that role and run with it. I hope he can, because if he can, it's a sustainable approach to Josh's play, especially because now he doesn't have to be Superman. You give him the opportunity to trust what he sees in the middle of the field. You are making things easier for your franchise quarterback, who can now play a more sustainable game of football longer than what he has been doing so far. That is my 4. Josh, who's your 3?
Well, Joe, I agree with everything you said. And proof of that is that Dalton Kincaid is my 3. And at the risk of sitting here and repeating everything you just so eloquently said, that I agree with all of it, I will just add on, I agree with everything you're saying about the slot, the easy throws to Josh, the bind that this 11.5 personnel puts defenses in. How are you going to match up personnel wise? And I will just oversimplify it. Dalton Kincaid was their big move offensively. All due respect to Connor McGovern, all due respect to Deontay Hardy and Trent Sherfield, who I think on their own will be upgrades over what they had last year in McKenzie and Shakir. Dalton Kincaid was their big swing. That was the guy they traded up for in the draft, and on night 1 had a defined role of the draft in the draft press conference of this is what he's going to do. Dalton Kincaid is the guy that off of that Bengals game where they had every starter from opening night healthy and they scored 10 points. He is the face of their offseason offensively. He has to matter this year. This is not a situation. Now, the conversation changes if DeAndre Hopkins walks through the door. Right. We all understand that, and we all will be excited about that. But living in this world where DeAndre Hopkins isn't here, Dalton Kincaid has to matter significantly year 1. Yeah. And that is a big ask for a rookie tight end at a position that historically does not contribute early, which is why I do think the Bills are going to simplify what they ask of him. But I am in complete lockstep with you. I think Dalton Kincaid is a major, major importance to this offense as early as this year. And that's why he's ranked 3rd for me.
Yeah. And it is a big ask, but he also was a 1st-round pick that they traded up for. And I think, yes, tight ends develop slow, but he's not going to be your conventional tight end, right? He's going to be a slot receiver too. I think the action comes his way a lot faster because he's also, while he can block, I don't think blocking is going to be asked of him as much as it will be asked for Knox and Morris in this offense. I think their full plan is to kind of do what we, when Greg talked about how they wanted to get Gesicki potentially being a big, not how they wanted to get Gesicki, I'm paraphrasing again, but the idea of getting like a Mike Gesicki, if he was affordable and having him be the big slot. To me, it's the same thing. And when you have him, I think because you're going to have him do more than just your conventional tight end, it's reasonable to expect more out of him. I kind of view it as Kincaid and Knox are going to be 2 halves of a 1,000-yard receiver this year. That's how I see it. I think you could easily see both of them getting like 400 to 500 yards a piece and probably racking up a combined like 7 to 9, maybe 10 touchdowns a piece, depending on how often they're used in the red zone. Because I also think this team's going to have a lot of options for how they want to score in the red zone this season. But if they do that, I'm going to be perfectly happy with it. Because again, as long as I see Kincaid's got a role that affects how defenses plan, that's good enough for me. So he was my 4. My number 3 was your number 5, Mitch Morse. Mitch Morse is a vital cog to this machine. He is vital to the offensive line. He has a great rapport with Josh. He is the starting center. Your starting center is huge. And when he goes down, I like Ryan Bates in the center role, but you can tell that there is a noticeable difference in center play when Morse goes down versus when Bates is in. Morse is a talented center that needs to stay on the field. He's the commander of your offensive line. Morse is also going to be inheriting new bodies next to him, potentially with McGovern and now Torrance, if he happens to take that starting role, should they want Bates to be this utility lineman. I think Morse needs to stay healthy this year. I think there's been plenty of times this past season where you saw the drop-off in center play affect how this offense ran. The first Miami game and the Minnesota game are the most glaring that come to mind. You need to be able to protect Josh. You need to be able to run the ball, which Mitch is great in run blocking. You need to stay on the field. He is a very important piece to this offense that I think needs to be there this year, and he's my number 3. Do you agree, Josh?
Oh, 100%. And then you talk about that quarterback center relationship and the fact that he's been there with Josh Allen since 2019, the rapport they have. He's only missed 5 games, like I mentioned before. I love Mitch Morse. I love everything about him. Quite honestly, the reason why he's lower on my list at 5 instead of 3 is more about the belief I have in what they have behind him this year versus last year. I think they're in a better position where if Mitch Morse were to miss a month, to have a Ryan Bates go in there versus what they had to trot out there last year with Van Roten in Miami, which was a disaster. I think it's more about the belief in Bates versus the importance of Morris. I can't stress enough. Center is one of those positions. It's kind of like a closer in baseball. I know you're a baseball guy, Yankee fan.
Unfortunately.
You don't notice the closer until they mess up. Center's a lot like that. Like Mitch Morse might go 10 games. You're just like, I haven't heard his name. What's going on? And then he has one bad snap. You're like, oh, classic Morse. But no, you never notice Morse because he just does his job super efficiently. And is he the best center in the league? No, but he's the best center for this team. And he's very, very important.
Yes. And Bills fans are spoiled with good center play. All those years of Eric Wood, then they had the couple years span before Morse where it was a drop off. It matters. And we were so used to it because, you don't hear the center's name being called unless it's for something good. That's the best case scenario. And I like Ryan Bates. I don't want this to come off as like an anti-Ryan Bates comment. Like Ryan Bates serves this team very well. I'm excited for him to be that versatile piece should he not be the starting guard if Torrance plays. And I can trust him to hold the center position down for maybe, a month or so. Or he could excel, prove me wrong, and be just as good with Morse getting up there in age and maybe just being someone who can hold that center role for the long term if that's how they see it. But I just value Mitch Morse so much in this offense. I want to see him healthy. I want to see him play. I think his presence just stabilizes the line. He knows all the plays. He's building there with Josh. He has such high praise for Josh. It's just a chemistry I don't want to see broken up. So now let's move on to number 2. Who do you got?
This was a tough one. My number 2 and my number 1 were very, very close. And player-wise, one is, I think, significantly better than the other. One is a superstar and one is good. But I look at what's behind the good one and what happens if the good one goes away. And that's why it becomes such a tough conversation. But at the end of the day, my number 2 is going to be left tackle Deion Dawkins. I think the conversation on Deion Dawkins has become a little unfortunate. I think Bills fans are starting to look at Deion Dawkins maybe similar to the way they viewed Tremaine Edmonds, where they're not appreciating the stuff he does well and they're only focusing on the stuff he doesn't do well. My opinion on Deion Dawkins is he's a pretty good left tackle. And look around the league. Pretty good left tackles are really hard to find.
Yes.
There's a reason why every time the draft rolls around, tackles are getting overdrafted because there are 64 tackles that start every game day, and there are not 64 human beings alive qualified to play tackle in the NFL. And it looks really bad if you start having injuries. Speaking of injuries, you go from pretty good in Deion Dawkins to David Quessenberry at this point in time. One of my biggest free agent needs for the Bills was upgrading swing tackle. I still think there's a path for them to do that. George Fant is out there, but the fact that it's May 27th and George Fant hasn't signed with anybody probably means that teams in the league know more than I do about George Fant at this stage of his career. So it looks like we're running it back with either David Quessenberry or Tommy Doyle. And you talk about this Bills team. Can you imagine, Joe, if the Bills go out this weekend and sign DeAndre Hopkins, and they have DeAndre Hopkins, Stephon Diggs, Dawson Knox, Dalton Kincaid, James Cook, they are ready to roll. And then in training camp, Deion Dawkins tears his ACL. And David Quessenberry is your left tackle for all that offensive talent.
Did you hear me knocking on wood, by the way?
It is a nightmare situation. I think David Quessenberry probably isn't as bad as he showed against New England, where he fell over 4 times in one game just trying to get into his pass set. He was hurt.
He was on a bum ankle. I think that's that needs to be said. He couldn't plant his feet that game. Yeah. He was just a body.
And he toughed it out that game. And just, Luca, my partner, and I do post-game shows on Built in Buffalo, and we do this segment called Game Balls and Game Checks. And so game ball is like, who was our MVP? Game check is like, who should hand in their game check because they played so poorly, like we want their game check back. And we both refused to give it to David Quessenberry for that game because, one, you can't get mad at a backup for playing like a backup. They're a backup for a reason. And two, I had empathy for the fact that he was dealing with an injury. There is some hope, I suppose, in what Tommy Doyle can become, but coming off of the ACL injury, I don't know how much you really want to put your eggs in that basket. I'm just surprised at what they've done at the tackle position, particularly considering that I don't know that they still know what they have in Spencer Brown.
No.
But, you can't fill every need in the offseason. They believe in Spencer Brown. But that, to me, is why Deion Dawkins is very important and why he was like this close, Joe, to be my number one.
Yeah, RJ with the banger comment here. This has to be said, man. I wish. I just want to stress this. With this show, I know I talk about players on the team. I have no personal anything with any player. So I hope every player succeeds. I hope every player has good fortune, good health in their lives. It is never personal with me. But we could all objectively say Saffold was underwhelming.
He was a Pro Bowler, Joe.
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. He was a Pro Bowler. I'm sorry. He was a Pro Bowler. He was not what we wanted him to be this year, if I'm being nice about it. And I'm glad RJ brought that up. I honestly think some of you could call it regression from Dawkins had to do with just how bad the interior was on the left side. It was woeful. It was hard to watch. It happened. Oh, I don't even want, no, we're not going to go down that road.
So real quick on our season wrap-up show, we did a season-long game check award winner for the entire season. Luca went on for 5 minutes about how much he disliked Roger Saffold and wrapped it up with, I can't wait to never see you step on the field as a Buffalo Bill again.
Goodness.
So we agree with you, Joe.
Yes. I listen, I understand these guys are human beings, so I'm never going to make it personal. We all saw what we saw. It wasn't great. I'll give him this. He played in Cromer's system. He was relearning a new playbook. I'm sure that's very hard to do, especially when you're on a 1-year deal and you feel the need to show out. It just didn't work out. Wish him all the best. I hope a new team signs him and he does well there. Now,
I hope a team in the AFC East signs him, honestly.
You never know. It's possible. Guard depth is needed.
I'd love to see him line up for the Jets week 1. That would be.
No, that'd be fantastic. That game can't come soon enough. But I'll move on to my number 2. It's a bit different, but I think it needs to be said, and it might be an obvious layup, so forgive me if this is too cliche to mention, but it's Stefon Diggs. And why I say this is because while you have Josh Allen obviously being your commander of your offense, Stefon Diggs is his general. That's his right-hand man. That is the source of all of the danger of this offense, right? Stefon Diggs alone creates problems for defenses. It creates the need to double team. It creates differences in how you cover just how the Bills pass. He is a vertical threat no matter who is on him, no matter what corner he faces. He can get himself open, and he's gone toe-to-toe with the best. And he's proven himself in games where we needed him. It is imperative that he continues this year. And why I say this is because with D-Hop, without D-Hop, this offense, this receiving core hinges on Stefon Diggs' ability to just be an alpha wide receiver, to be the one, to dominate the boundary no matter who's on him, to find ways to get open, even if he's double teamed, to offset some of the burden that's going to eventually go on Gabe Davis if you don't get DeAndre Hopkins, to give Dalton Kincaid the opportunity to not be honed in on because you have to worry about Stefon Diggs up top. He is a leader. He's a captain. I don't care if he wasn't at OTAs, a voluntary camp, whatever. He is the general of this receiving room. He needs to be that alpha this year. He needs to continue the pace. I know it's obvious, but he is so vital to Josh Allen. He's so vital to this offense as a whole. He is my number 2 for a reason. He needs another stellar year. He'll galvanize the entire room if he continues to be productive. That is why he is my 2. It's very simple. But it's the truth.
Yeah. I mean, he's my 1. And because I really struggled with the Dawkins thing, because I honestly believe, Joe, that the Bills have done enough with the addition of Kincaid, the addition of Harris, the upgrades we think are coming on the offensive line, what we should see in upgrades with Hardy and Sherfield, that if the Bills have to go a month without Stefon Diggs, they can still function offensively and still be good enough to win games, because they still do have an all-pro quarterback back there and what we think should be an improved signal caller in Ken Dorsey from year 1 to year 2. I think they have enough where they can play moving chess piece and get stuff done. But you hit the nail on the head. Stefon Diggs, all due respect to all the guys I just named, not including Josh Allen, is the one guy on this offense to this point, Dalton Kincaid, we're hoping becomes this, that defensive coordinators stay up at night figuring, how do I stop this guy? He has elite body control. He can beat you downfield. He has elite route running. I remember covering the draft with Luca, and we were going through our wide receiver rankings, and it was like, oh man, Jordan Addison runs great routes, but man, he's just kind of slow. Or Quentin Johnston is big. He can get downfield, but there's just not much like good rec. And it's just like, man, Stephon Diggs can do everything. And aren't there more Stephon Diggs in this world? I think one of the more telling Stephon Diggs moments to me was a painful memory for a lot of Bills fans. The Jacksonville game in 2021, where they went down there and they just randomly lost to Urban Meyer's Jaguars. They could not get anything going offensively. There was a drive in the fourth quarter where it was painfully obvious that Josh Allen said, I am throwing this ball to Stephon Diggs if there are 4 guys on him. And they went like 5 plays in a row. Diggs. Last season, Stephon Diggs was not only Stephon Diggs for Josh Allen, he was Cole Beasley for Josh Allen. What do I mean by that? In years past, when chaos would happen, when the Bills would have a couple drives where they couldn't get anything going, or when they take a bad sack, it was just, okay, 3rd and Cole. Let's get a reset. Cole will move the chains. Let's settle it down, guys. We're going to be just fine. And Stephon Diggs not only had to be the alpha in the room, the number 1 wide receiver, he also had to be the security blanket for Josh Allen last year. And another thing, and I think this, and I'm not sitting here trying to play like therapist and is Diggs unhappy, yada, 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 but I think this may have weighed on him last year as well. In previous years, there was Emmanuel Sanders there. There was John Brown there. There was Cole Beasley there. He was the alpha in the room, but he wasn't necessarily like the big brother in the room. Like there were people he could lean on, he could talk to. When things get stressful, Emmanuel Sanders could pull him aside on the sideline and be like, hey, dude, the ball's going to come to you. You're fine. Like, this is what we do. It really showed last year when Stephon Diggs, at the beginning of the year, when Beasley and Brown weren't there was no Sanders, not only the alpha, not only the security blanket in Beasley, but also the old guy in the room, the veteran. I think it weighed on him as the season went on. You saw some of the frustrations play out, particularly in the second half of the year. And like you said, we can talk all off season about how this team is still in a championship window and how this team on their best is as good as any team in this league. And I firmly believe that. If Stephon Diggs isn't Stephon Diggs, that conversation gets a lot more complicated. That's why to me he's number 1.
He's vital. Outside of Allen, I think he's your best offensive player. There's a reason he isn't my number 1. And before I get to the number 1, I want to mention some of the honorable mentions. One of them is Deion Dawkins. I think Deion Dawkins had a slight regression. However, it was still middle of the pack as far as like grading goes. I think he's due for a bounce back year, and I think he's going to do a little bit better now that ideally the interior next to him is shored up and a little better in pass protection. Take some of the slack off of him, not have to worry about someone getting through as quickly. I think it's going to bode well for him in his performance this year. And really just some of the other depth pieces like Harris. We could even talk Torrance. I was even going to mention, Dawson Knox on that list because he's obviously your physical tight end. He's the other part of your 12 personnel. He's your up to Kincaid side to side, and he's your red zone threat. He's an honorable mention for me because I do think I have confidence in how he's going to play this year. And I think his role is important, but I don't think a Knox injury negates the Bills' ability to move the ball, assuming everyone else is healthy. I do think his presence on the field just gives you more to do and more opportunity, which is the idea. And I still think Dawson Knox is deserving of his contract, and I still think he's going to have a pretty good year for the Bills. But I can kind of see the world where even if he goes down with like some sort of soft tissue injury for, let's say, 2 to 4 games, that they could survive, assuming the rest of the offensive roster is healthy. My number 1 is the man who is under the most pressure, the man who the team has clearly indicated that they support, despite this fan base not supporting him. Can you guess who that is, Josh?
There's 2 guesses in my mind. It's either Gabe Davis or Spencer Brown, but I'm thinking that when the fact that you said fan base, I'm thinking it's Gabe Davis.
No, it's Spencer Brown.
Okay.
Spencer Brown's my number 1. And you might think I'm nuts for this. I'm going to tell you why Spencer Brown's my number 1, because they have shown us, the organization has shown us that they have faith in Spencer Brown being the right tackle for this season. They have faith in him taking that much needed 3rd-year leap to protect Josh Allen, to be a viable run blocker, to know his role, to avoid getting untimely penalties, to be this alpha right tackle that this team desperately needs. He is the gatekeeper of Josh Allen's most important asset, his arm. His UCL just suffered an injury that we are lucky was not worse, given the angle he was hit at, given the time he was hit at. We should be thankful that Allen was not out the remainder of the year and even part of this year. there is an exponential amount of pressure on Spencer Brown this season. I have not had the kindest of words of his play, but I am rooting for Spencer Brown to take that step forward, protect Josh Allen's arm, man the right side of the line, not force us into binds where the ball has to come out quickly. Protect your $256 million asset that is behind you. And if he can take that step forward, it completes the circuit that is this offensive line. You can find that chart that shows the individual grades, the average grading of the current starters, projected starters on the Bills roster. And there was something along the lines of like everyone had a pretty average to good grade. And then Spencer Brown was like in single digits. He needs to take that step forward. And the Bills have told all of us just by their actions that this man is their intended starter at that role. He is going into the season healthy. He is going into the season. Now he is finally working with Kromer one-on-one because remember, he was hurt and didn't get the opportunity to fully immerse himself with Kromer last season. He has the opportunity to automatically and massively increase his stock as a player this season, and he is tasked with debatably the most important role in this offensive line outside of Mitch Morse. He is my number one for that reason. He is absolutely important. His play, taking a step forward, will change things dramatically for this line and make Josh Allen feel much more at peace, much more confident in the pocket, much more, even though he could see this side, still able to deliver and not feel under duress constantly in the game. He is my number one, and I'm curious what your thoughts are on that, Josh.
I think this is a perfect example about the interpretation of the assignment. What does important mean to you? Because there's a comment in chat from Johnny Thunders, Diggs out for the year or Brown, what's going to hurt more? And that's how I approached it. So my thought is, I agree with everything you said. The belief they've shown in Spencer Brown, and we kind of got the sense even from their postseason wrap-up press conference where it was, oh, he had the back injury and he couldn't take advantage of training camp, or he was in college during the COVID years, so his development was hampered by that. He went to a smaller school. Like, we heard all of that, and he's such a high-end athlete. But my thought is the reason why Spencer Brown didn't make my top 5 is how I approached this assignment. I keep saying assignment like you're my teacher. If Spencer Brown goes down week 1 for the rest of the year, I don't know how big of a drop-off right now we're looking at between Spencer Brown and David Quessenberry, viewing Spencer Brown through the lens that I currently view him in. Now, to your point, important to you is a lot rides on them being right on Spencer Brown. If this season goes south, there is going to be a lot of conversation about why did you not address the right tackle situation? Did we need the Bills to go out and sign Juwan Taylor? No. But Kelvin Beachum would have been a nice insurance policy. There were guys out there to be had with starting experience that the Brandon Shell, George Fant, those guys are still out there that could at least come in and push. But now it's Tommy Doyle off of an ACL and David Quessenberry, whatever's left of him. And I hate saying it like that, but that's the truth. And they just have not insulated themselves. So yeah, they better be right on Spencer Brown. And I agree with everything you said. So if your interpretation of most important as in who are they most under pressure to be right about? Well, Spencer Brown would go to the top of the list. And I can tell you on Built in Buffalo, we're doing a similar project, top 10, and we all submitted lists. And there were some folks that had Spencer Brown number 1. So you're not alone in that. It makes perfect sense. And just to echo everything you said, they better be right because this is a championship level team and their right tackle situation is a huge question mark with nothing behind it that makes you feel like plan B is there.
And in a weird way, that kind of makes me confident, right? Like in a weird way, you're talking about this organization saying, this is your job. This is your role. We trust you. We have faith in you. We've seen what we've seen firsthand. We know the analytics. We have watched you on the field. We've coached you. This is still your role. This is year 3. Go get it. They have way more confidence in Brown than we do. So for that reason, it does make me feel a little bit better that they are willing to take this risk on Spencer Brown, that they see the athletic upside, the physicality that he brings, the fact that he had absolutely insane RAS numbers, the fact that Kromer seems to feast when he has athletic linemen. It could work. There is absolutely a realm of possibility where Brown takes that step forward to a good tackle, not even an elite one. Someone made this comment. I think it was Will right here. Yes, my goodness, if Brown plays to a good, not even Pro Bowl level, which Pro Bowl level, he can't, not everyone can be Roger Saffold, and it improves the entire functionality of the team. Yes, absolutely. This is all we need from Spencer Brown. He does not have to be an all-pro tackle. I would love it if he is an all-pro tackle. This is not me saying I don't want him to succeed to that regard. What it is me saying is just be good. This line does not have to be elite. Josh Allen can make plays go longer than they need to. Josh Allen can pick up some of your slack. Just take a little bit off his plays. Play better. Just be that's such a stupid comment, but I still say it. Play a little bit better. Be a better blocker. Establish yourself more. Because if you can do that, this whole offense gets better as a result. And I just find that what you said before, yes, the line behind Brown might not be a significant drop-off, but think about what Brown brings to the running game and then apply that to Quessenberry or Tommy Doyle. Think about how well they could block in space. Can they do it as well as Spencer Brown, or is Brown the clear-cut best on this roster as far as that regard on the right side? To me, it's Brown. So now if you lose Spencer Brown for the year and you bring in one of these backups, congratulations. You marginally improved your pass protection and decreased your running ability. I think it's much more impactful than people think if Brown goes down. He is a vital piece of this offensive line that the Bills have expressed a lot of faith in. He is my number one on this list. Go Bills. I can't think of anything else to say. But Josh, I think we are at the tail end of our program today. For all of you, first and foremost, Josh, thank you so much for coming in. Feel free to plug whatever you got going on. Again, I know you did it at the top, but I want people to know where you're at, where they can find you, what you got going on. Let's hear it.
Oh, the big thing is just Bills Chat Pod on Twitter. Follow us there. We'd really appreciate it. We are on part of the Built-in Buffalo podcast network. My partner, Luca, who is engaged, getting married in a couple of weeks. We haven't been putting out shows consistently because of that, taking a little bit of a break since the draft, but we'll be ramping up again as training camp gets close. Built-in Buffalo YouTube, Built-in Buffalo podcast network. Again, Joe, always appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, always happy to have you, man. You're a hell of a guest. I love talking to you. It's always a blast. And guys, I'm sure if anyone's seen the tag today, Joverit, the reason I put this down is because this morning's show was a mountain to climb to get to. I take a train to go into the city every day. The place that I hoist objects in, I don't want to sound like a jerk, is there. So I go there in the mornings, and then I usually take my train back to my apartment, and then I'm here lickety split. However, for some reason, they decided to do maintenance on the entire track coming back. So I had no way to take a train back. So I was like, okay, I'm going to go get a ferry. I go to get the ferry. The ferry does not show up. 21 minutes turns into 10, turns into 5, and then revamps back into 45 minutes. So I had no boat to get on. So I had to call an Uber to get back here. I got in my door at 10:51, got everything in a scramble, and we still got started at 11:05. I am so appreciative of you, Josh, for joining me, and for all of you tuning into the comments live, and for all of you listening to us after the fact. I thought today's show was an absolute blast. I look forward to doing it again next week, where I take a list of the defensive players, so get ready for that one. Maybe some more D-Hop news as well if we find anything out on that regard. But if you guys have not already done so, please, please, please leave a like on this video. Subscribe to Cover One. Subscribe to Cover One's premium pass. You could join the Slack channel and join the discussion on all things Bills. Get some amazing insight that the guys provide. They do a lot of great work on this channel. They really put their best foot forward to give you guys great content. So it would mean the world to me if you could drop a like on any of the videos you've watched. It is so, so appreciated. But for Josh, for myself, for all of you, I want to first wish you a go Bills. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. As Anthony says, be good to one another. Take care of each other. As Thomas says, life is too short. Enjoy your weekend. Good vibes only. Go Bills, and I will see you next week. Take care.